Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to another explainer. Today, we're exploring this absolutely fascinating intersection where ancient philosophy meets modern biology. We are going to unpack a connection that, honestly, might completely change how you look at your morning grooming routine. We're talking about the secret life of your hair and what it's actually trying to tell you about your internal health. So get this. Did you know that ancient texts consider your hair to be the literal leftovers of your skeleton? I mean, it sounds almost like science fiction, right? But thousands of years ago, Ayurvedic texts proposed this exact startling premise. They claimed that the hair on your head is directly tied to the metabolic processes of your bones. To have healthy hair, you've got to have a healthy skeleton. It's a massive shift from how we usually think about hair care today, which pretty much just focuses on the surface of the scalp. But what if those ancient scholars were onto something really profound? Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the bone and hair connection, dive into the biology of the hair follicle, and outline the life cycle of a hair. Then we'll look at calithea, or hair loss, before finally seeing exactly where ancient wisdom meets modern science. All right, Section 1, the bone and hair connection and its ancient Ayurvedic roots. So, in Ayurvedic medicine, the human body is built from 7 primary tissues, or dhatus. Asti refers to the bone tissue, and the word itself comes from a Sanskrit root that literally means to exist or to remain stable. Asti is the enduring framework of the human body. It represents permanence. The ancient texts beautifully point out that even when softer tissues fade over time, the bones remain. They are the true physical essence of our structural integrity. Now, here is where it gets incredibly interesting. When asti, your bone tissue, is metabolized and nourished by the body, that process creates a byproduct. It's a metabolic waste, known as a mala. And according to these texts, kesha, or scalp hair, is exactly that. The shocking ancient connection is basically this. Hair isn't just some cosmetic feature that happens to grow out of your skin. It's the direct outward reflection of your bone metabolism. Meaning, if your foundation, your bones, is depleted, your hair is going to immediately show it. Okay, let's shift gears for a second and see how this builds into our current understanding. If Ayurveda views hair through this deep, skeletal lens, how exactly does modern science look at the scalp? Moving on to Section 2, the biology of the hair follicle, which is essentially a dynamic mini-organ. Just take a second to appreciate this staggering number, 100,000 to 150,000. That's the number of hair follicles strictly on your scalp. And these aren't just dead tubes sitting there. Each one of these follicles contains epithelial stem cells, pigment-producing melanocytes, immune cells, nerve endings, and this highly specialized vascular network. They are quite literally among the most active, continuously regenerating structures in the entire human body. When we compare the two philosophies side by side, a pretty beautiful harmony emerges. The ancient view states hair as a metabolic byproduct of bone and relies on paternal genetics. They even noted back then that hair follicle count is established in the womb. Meanwhile, the modern view defines hair as a keratinized outgrowth, fundamentally determined by fetal DNA and molecular signaling pathways. So, both systems firmly acknowledge that hair is definitely not a superficial cosmetic afterthought. It has deep, systemic, genetic, and metabolic origins. Which brings us to Section 3, the life cycle of a hair and its continuous cellular renewal. Take a look at these distinct phases of continuous cellular renewal for every single hair on your head. It starts with anagen, the active growth phase, which lasts anywhere from 2 to 6 years. Actually, right now, about 85 to 90% of the hair on your head is in this active anagen phase. Then it transitions to catagen, which is a rapid 2 to 3 week phase where the follicle shrinks down. Next up is telogen, a resting phase lasting a few months, followed by exogen, where the hair actively sheds, and sometimes even kenogen, where the follicle just sits empty, resting before starting the whole shebang all over again. It is a wonderfully orchestrated biological symphony. Let's jump to Section 4, Paulesia, tracing hair loss, or what happens when this cycle breaks. So calatia is the classical Ayurvedic term for hair loss or baldness. But, they didn't just see it as hair falling out. They defined it as a profound systemic imbalance. Specifically, they noted that it happens when the vital energies, the doshas, known as vata, pitta, and kapha, along with rakta, your blood, become vitiated or corrupted. This internal corruption basically travels up to the scalp, scorches the follicle, and blocks any new growth. So what actually causes this internal corruption? Well, you might be surprised. The ancient text listed some incredibly relatable everyday habits. Eating too many dry, raw salads. Yeah, your latest health kick might literally be thinning your hair. Or consuming way too much caffeine or alcohol, which rapidly penetrates and destabilizes the body. And how about ignoring a runny nose? They actually believed chronic sinus inflammation spreads to the microchannels of the head. Even suppressing tears is on the list, which makes total sense because modern science tells us that spikes cortisol and stress hormones, prematurely pushing hair into the shedding phase. And finally, incompatible food combinations that just wreck your digestion. The ancients explicitly warned that excessive salt makes a person susceptible to colitis. So the crucial point here is how this translates to modern biology. When you consume excessive salt, it causes microvascular changes and oxidative stress. Now, your hair follicles are incredibly metabolically demanding. They need a constant, healthy blood supply to thrive. If your diet impairs that microcirculation or alters the acidic pH of your scalp barrier, your follicles literally shrink down, leading to miniaturization and hair loss. So the ancients recognized the dietary trigger, and modern science explains the biological mechanism. And that brings us to Section 5, Ancient Wisdom Meets Modern Science, the Grand Convergence. Notice how flawlessly these ancient categories map onto modern dermatological diagnoses. It is an absolute aha moment. Ancient scholars categorized colitis into different types based on exactly which dosha was out of balance. So a vata imbalance maps directly to telogen effluvium. Pitta maps to inflammatory seborrheic dermatitis. Kapha maps right over to heavy, oily dandruff. And Sanipataja maps to alopecia areata. Let's actually break a couple of these down to really see the genius here. Now, what's really interesting about this is the specific description of Vataja colitis. The ancients described the scalp as looking dark, dry, and almost like burnt skin. Today, we call this telogen effluvium, or age-related thinning. It's characterized by reduced scalp circulation, tissue depletion, and nutritional deficiency. Basically, the hair cycle gets totally shocked by stress, pushing massive amounts of hair into the shedding phase, leaving behind this dull, undernourished scalp. And then we have Sanipataja halitia, which represents a severe multi-dosha imbalance. The old texts describe a scalp that is completely hairless, smooth and shiny like a bear's nail, often with a burning sensation. In modern dermatology, this brilliantly describes alopecia areata. This is a condition where the follicle's immune privilege just collapses, and the body's own immune system attacks the hair bulb, resulting in those smooth, distinctly hairless patches. And this brilliantly illustrates the core takeaway of our explainer today. Whether you use the ancient language of vitiated doshas traveling up to the scalp, or the modern language of inflammatory cytokines and oxidative stress disrupting the anagen phase, the underlying truth is identical. Hair loss is rarely just a local issue on the surface of your skin. It is almost always the end result of a systemic disruption. Which leaves us with this final thought. We started out by learning that ancient texts view hair as the metabolic byproduct of your bones, your structural foundation. So I have to ask you, are your daily habits, your diet, your sleep, your stress levels, are they nourishing that deep internal foundation, or are they slowly draining it? Because long before you ever feel it in your bones, you just might see it in your hair. Thanks so much for exploring with me today, and keep learning.